Hey! So this is going to be a little bit of an early version of the video that I said I was going to do on Thursday. So I'm going to go through a list that I made regarding the different types of topics that you can get into for careers in psychology. So maybe I'll do half of them now and half of them on Thursday. But if any of you pop in, you can ask certainly about these different levels. So, if you wanted to do clinical psychology and work directly with patients, would you recommend a PhD or a PsyD? I would recommend first that you look at the difference between counseling master's programs and doctoral programs, because you can work with patients with only a master's degree and it wastes a lot less of your time and money to do so. And then from there, it depends on whether or not you want the capability to do certain types of research. And if your patients were going to be in like specialized populations in hospitals, or you just kind of wanted to open your own practice. If you wanted to do your own practice, I would recommend looking into PsyD programs, but PsyD programs are much more expensive than the PhD programs because they are almost exclusively at private universities. They're going to charge you an arm and a leg to go there. It is a lot easier to get into a PsyD program than it is to get into a PhD one, but you have to weigh those things out. So the first thing on my list is, I'm making a catalog right now of different careers in psychology. So excuse me if I look like I'm looking at something in this direction, because I am. And I've separated them down into like these 8 different subtopics, and then I'm working on breaking them down by the different levels of what your education is. So from the associate's level down through the doctoral level. So the first grouping I have is human service careers, such as social service workers, welfare agencies, agents, detention center workers, which you're talking about prisons and like juvenile detention centers and like basically stuff related to incarceration, or group home workers, and group homes being like hospice care type things, or like foster children, like where they would go and live in between being placed into homes and whatnot. So these jobs are characterized by working with underprivileged or at-risk populations and are usually funded by or affiliated with government agencies. They deal predominantly with adults. So I tend to go through these different things and say whether or not they're working with children or adult populations, but these typically are adult types of things. So you're not usually dealing with small children. Maybe in a group home situation, you have families involved, but for the most part, you're looking at adult populations with this. And like I said, might have some family related things. So at the associate's level, there are a few different types of assistant positions that all they require is some sort of associate's degree, and some of them even require less. Like they just want you to have a high school diploma and be actively in college working towards some sort of psychology degree. So everything that I talk about in terms of these individual careers, I have a little bit of a background in terms of what the career actually is, and they have some sort of posting online that has made me include them in this list. So they are real things that you can go out on like Indeed or Monster and type this in and find these jobs. So there's something called a social and human service assistant, which is client services and rehabilitation, working with families and adults. And in this particular job, you'd be working on trying to identify what type of benefits program somebody would need from the government. So you'd be working with like Section 8 or welfare or food stamps, like whatever it is that the family is trying to get these benefits because they don't have the income or whatever. So you'd be working with those people who are trying to get into the system for benefits and whatnot, and determining what they qualify for and kind of helping the process of allotting out that federal money. So this would be something where you're working with the government, if not directly for the government, with an agency that works closely with the government, because we're talking about government money here. But typically, and I have salary ranges for all this stuff too, so about 20 to 30,000 a year. But if you get a bachelor's degree and you stay in that career and stay with the whole social and human service thing in terms of government and welfare and whatnot, you can look to get your salary up into the low 50,000 range. So there are jobs all over the place for this. It's something that is in pretty high demand, because if you think, all of the people who need this type of assistance have to have some sort of person that is like the social worker involved, the contact between the government and the person. So there are these jobs. They're around. Second, welfare agency assistant. So where the other one is more interacting with people, a welfare agency assistant would be much more of like an office related thing. And they also include unemployment benefits, Social Security, and different types of housing. So it's very similar to the other job, but it makes a little bit more. Instead of starting at 20, it starts at 22 to 32 yearly. And when you look at salary ranges, when you go and put in, if you went to Indeed and type this in, which a lot of these come from Indeed, it's a good source for these jobs. When they give you a range, to get to the top of that range, you're looking at being overqualified. You're looking at having more than the associates, yet you're still looking at this particular job instead of a bachelor's degree. You're looking at having multiple years experience in that field. The lowest end is going to be your entry job. Like, this is your first job in this field. You meet the minimum qualifications, but maybe not some of the extra things that they're wanting from these people. So just like the previous job, with advanced degrees or more experience, jobs in this went up to about $60,000 a year. So in general, if you were talking about those jobs doing between kind of the end of your bachelor's degree and when you went off to do a master's program, it's a decent option for you in the middle of that. And then since it's government related most of the time, government jobs tend to help pay for advanced degrees once you have some sort of tenure there. And I don't know how much time it is. It varies from place to place on how much time you need to have with the job. But if you work there for a year or so, usually somewhere around there, and you have all the benefits and you show promise of going somewhere within the particular branch you're in, they'll usually have some sort of compensation for like whatever you're going to do in terms of school. Hi, Marcus. So those were both things you could do with associate's degrees. So in the same thing of social service at the bachelor's level, they have something called a career counselor or a vocational rehabilitation person. They didn't give it an official title. So these individuals provide counsel, group education, and vocational guidance services. So counseling to people who are in problems where they can't find jobs. So helping them figure out what it is that they need to do, placing them in the correct sorts of jobs, scheduling classes for GEDs, technical school, even up through college. And then if they have any problems, it talks about truancy. So we're looking at placing people who maybe have felonies, and only certain career paths will take people with felonies, placing these people into something that will get them back on their feet from a hard situation, essentially. So it's an element kind of social work, but you're working with adults who are looking to kind of make a change for the positive in their lives and get into these jobs. And maybe it's a part of their probation that they have to come and see you or whatnot. But there are multiple job listings for this too I don't have a salary range for this, but I would imagine that it's somewhere in like the 30 to 40 range starting off. But there are multiple different types of these jobs. You can work in like a general government one, or you can work with a private sort of institution that's doing this, or within one of those like social work home type things. So another job that falls under bachelor's level, but still in this human services thing, is a residential services coordinator. So there are facilities for people who have intellectual and physical disabilities as adults, where they have some sort of assistance and they live in group homes that provide medical attention and whatnot. And with your degree in psychology, with your bachelor's degree, you can get a job in one of these places, and starting around 25,000, but some of the jobs go up to like 40. So it probably depends on the individual group home. But you would do everything from basic living, self-care, psychological services. They have behavior analysis aspects, parts of this vocational thing, making sure that they're being properly seen for medical related stuff. So you have a particular caseload as this person, this residential services coordinator, and you would work with a particular group of people within one of these facilities. So not something you probably ever knew existed, and now you do. Another job at the bachelor's level is a victim or family advocate. So this is going to sound like something that would require a more sophisticated degree than a bachelor's degree. But the key words here is that as a victim family advocate, you would be a trained professional in non-clinical support. So you'd be offering all of the support in terms of court cases, accompanying victims to trial, just working with them in terms of whatever happens in the proceedings of basically them experiencing something really awful and the remuneration process of that. But you would not be involved in doing therapy with them. So it'd be like one step before that. And starting for this is a little bit more. It's like $30,000 a year. But this type of crisis intervention sort of worker can be anything from children to adults to people that could go into witness protection. There are a bunch of different career paths you could take with that, but you'd still be kind of in this social work services category. So we got social and community service managers. These individuals plan, direct, coordinate activities with social service programs or community outreach organizations. So when you see like those buses that drive around and they go out and give healthcare into the community, or like do dental stuff within the community, or any of that type of thing, that's who you're looking at. Somebody who organizes these programs and decides exactly where they need to go and what they need to offer to people in need. So depending on what your degree is, how advanced it is in your experience, you can make somewhere between 30 and 50,000 a year with bachelor's degrees. But if you decided to pursue this with a master's or even further up, this is actually one of the more well-paying positions you could get in psychology. There were some jobs of over 100,000 a year, which is not something you're going to see very often in anything psychology related. So that would be way, way up with organizations that have a lot of money to put into this. And then the last one I have for bachelor's level with like social human services is an admissions specialist. So this is within rehab facilities. So making sure people are getting treatment for the correct addiction that they have, or illness that they have, like mental health illness that they have, and making sure that they complete these different types of rehab programs. So you'd be working with a very specific population. They're probably going to want you to have some experience prior to getting into this with the addiction-related populations. But it's another thing that makes somewhere around 35 a year starting off with your bachelor's degree, which is not terrible. It's not great either, but it's not horrible. So then if you were looking to do this human services thing at a higher level with a higher degree and wanted to get a master's degree in some sort of hybrid of psychology and social work. So most of these that I've talked about so far, they will accept a degree in psychology. They will accept a degree in social work. Some of them will accept degrees in education and outside related fields, depending on what you specialize in. But for these master's levels, you would want to go into either mental health counseling or a master's of social work. But either way, it's going to tie into psychology. So one of the jobs that is exclusive to a graduate level is called a residential youth counselor. So when we were talking about people transitioning from maybe prison and probation into a career, it's the same general idea, but transitioning youth from maybe correctional facilities or whatever it is that they've gotten themselves in trouble with, and transitioning them kind of back into a normal, positive life. So you'd be working specifically with the juvenile justice system. And with a master's degree, your jump in pay is from the 20 to 30 range up to now 50 to 70, depending on where you start and the types of accreditations that you have. Because once you get to a master's level, you can start doing little specializations in different things and get different kind of like minors at that master's level. So there are multiple positions for this. They come from different things. Some of them are more criminal than others, but you'd be working with some kind of troubled people. You'd be doing a good thing. So then you move on to state agency counselor. So it's a type of mental health counselor that focuses on individuals in state agency programs. So you'd be offering essentially therapy and general counseling to people that are in some way supported by the government. It could be from substance abuse, that they're in some sort of program and they've come out of rehab. It could be a variety of different situations. Depends on what you wanted to specifically look into. But here you're looking 45 to 60. So there's a general jump from the lower end being 20 to now the lower end is in the 40s somewhere with a master's degree. Still not great. Still not terrible. Still probably not going to have you survive in Miami, but we're going to work with it. You can do something called a social community service management, which would be those outreach programs at a higher level, and you can make more money. And you have something called a social services mental health counselor, who is going to directly deal with individuals or families that are coming from some sort of alcohol, tobacco, or drug-related problem. So similar to what we talked about before, starts around $50,000 a year. Something different, child custody worker. Individuals who work with Department of Children and Families, and they do foster care, adoptions, and consultations to prepare for successful transitions and placements of children into either different programs or families and whatnot. So this is something that's never going to go away. And it's definitely not an easy job, because you're going to be working with some children that might bounce around a ton of times before they end up somewhere that is actually stable and good for them. So this is like, it hits close to home. These are good people. It's a good job. So when you start looking at this, and I'll try to send this by the end of the semester to you guys once it gets more fine-tuned. Right now it's like messy in note form for me, but you'll see like a kind of pyramid shape when you look at most jobs in psychology, with the bottom of that pyramid being around the bachelor's level, even though you might not think it would be. And once you get to the PhD level, there's usually very few jobs that require the PhD above and beyond something else. The master's degree is where most of them start making that big transition between the entry salary being relatively low and unmanageable to something that you could really live off of. But in this PhD, PsyD, whatever level with human services, they have just a general health psychologist job. So they're clinical psychologists that specialize in the area of health, well-being, specifically related to the community and community outreach and whatever services. So they're not working within their own practice. They're working for the government or for like one of these homes or the juvenile detention sort of stuff. They're working within the context of that. Salary ranges from 60 to 100. The 100 being at the 10 plus years of experience level. So you can work towards that level of salary, but it's going to take you a minute to get there. So that was all under this umbrella of human service careers. So second category I have. So I have 8. I'll try to go through 4 now and 4 Thursday. So second general thing, general mental health careers. So you're looking at mental health technicians, counselors or counselor assistants, and crisis center workers. So at the associate's level, meaning you're halfway through your bachelor's degree or you went to Miami-Dade and you just did the associate's degree in psychology, you have something called a mental health technician, which you would work within some sort of hospital unit. It could be crisis stabilization. It could be like the ER. It could be a wide variety of things. And you don't have to have any sort of medical degree, but you'll be working within a medical scenario. So if you did want to go to med school or pursue something in some way related to working in a hospital, it's a good entry level job for that, because there's an AA level job and there's a bachelor's level job for this that actually pays a lot more than this. So you would be working underneath directly somebody with a higher level degree who was doing kind of the real job that needed to be done, administering things, doing medications, diagnosing, whatever. And you're just the technician that's in there, kind of like when you go to a doctor's office and there's somebody that takes all of your vitals down and the real doctor comes in. You'd be kind of like that. There's counselor assistants, which are similar to that. They're just assistants to counselors that are going to be in some sort of general mental health situation. And then they have a job that I never really even knew existed. I mean, I did, but I never thought of it. But an operator for crisis hotlines. So with an AA degree, you can go and be an operator for any one of those suicide prevention hotlines or just general distress hotlines, abusive relationships. They have them for a lot of different things. And with your AA degree, you can go in and do something like that. And it would also be a good transition into the whole mental health counseling field. So up into the bachelor's level, you've got case managers. So here we're looking at much more of the child population, because case managers are usually going to work with child protective services or some level of childhood abuse or DCF and whatnot, at least in this particular specification they are. And then you have something called a care coordinator, or it still falls under case manager, but primary duties to coordinate services for children and families referred to different care programs, to link children and families to service providers, and participating child care centers to service providers. So here we're looking at basically getting families childcare that needed to go and work and couldn't afford to do that and whatnot. So it's relating somehow to the family, the children, and school. Excuse me. There's a rehabilitation specialist position, which would be working in a rehab clinic with patients. But again, you'd be working underneath the very watchful eye of probably different psychiatrists and psychologists. Another job is outreach coordinator. So I don't have a definition of what this is, but I do have a sample job description. And it's from University of Miami Med School, which, if If you can ever get into University of Miami and work in anything psychology related with them, you are set. But it says the comprehensive AIDS program at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine has an exciting opportunity for a part-time outreach coordinator who will work in all applicable clinics throughout the University of Miami School of Medicine. They will assist clients referred from the Department of Health at risk of being lost to care or in continued engagement and re-engagement into medical care and medical case management. Make home visits, hospital visits at discharge, and interact with patients and their families. They will identify patients through various established outreach methods as well as patient self-identifications. So be working with the School of Medicine, but identifying kind of at-need populations and whatnot. So we talked about this in terms of the AA, but now you've got mental health technician at the bachelor's level, which would be one of the people that a technical assistant would work underneath. They prefer for you to have experience in the area, but you can usually do that by being the assistant first. So you will get, again, like a caseload from whatever it is, whatever center it is that you're looking at, and you're going to be dealing with something in terms of medically related. You could be something called an intake coordinator. So you're dealing particularly with patients and being the first person that they see when they come in and making sure they get to the appropriate place. There was a bunch of these positions on different job sites. One of them calls it emergency screener. The emergency screener is a member of the multidisciplinary team who provides quality care for the crisis stabilization unit within the scope of psychology. And then the one that you guys talk about a lot, but has absolutely nothing to do with any field of psychology that I do, is behavior analyst. So a behavioral therapist or RBT. So you're looking at a regular bachelor's level. So you have you can go into behavior analysis and not have the RBT or BCBA yet and be kind of more of the assistant, or you can get your BCBA, RBT thing and be able to directly work with patients. But the behavior analysis thing, again, not my area of expertise, but you're going to be working with different therapeutic techniques with a variety of populations. What I've seen with behavior analysis jobs, looking this stuff up, is that a lot of these places, if not almost every single job that I found, was looking for part-time RBTs or ABA therapists. So you might be looking into a career if you don't get a job with one of the select people that are looking for full-time in-house people, where you have to manage a couple of different jobs with a couple of different providers, where you go in and you work 20 hours with one and 20 hours with another and end up not with insurance and stuff like that. Sounds like my adjunct life. I don't recommend it. So hopefully you guys will get into those positions that are full-time where you don't have to hop around like this. So at the master's level, there is a higher paying behavior analysis thing. You have general mental health counselors, which is, I think, what the majority of your class wants to do, is being a mental health therapist, which you only need a master's degree for. You do not need more than that. You can get your master's degree in mental health counseling, and then with an extra year, you can get the licensed mental health counselor certification, which is like a 10-month program, depending on the accreditation of your master's program. So FIU has an accredited master's program where you can hop out, and then it's only like an extra 10 months. If you went somewhere that didn't have accreditation, which, let's see, where in Florida doesn't? I don't think places like St. Thomas and stuff like that have accredited. Carlos Albizu does not have accreditation. You'd go there and then you'd have to do like an extra 2 years to get the degree, because you kind of have to make up for coursework essentially that you didn't take. So it's highly recommended, especially if you want to do the Master of Health Mental Health Counseling, and you know you want to be a therapist and you really are interested in doing it at the master's level. Go Google LMHC and look up the governing body that gives these certifications out, and then it will show you which schools have programs that are accredited, exactly how long they will be accredited for, and then like any particular sub information, like if they have specific populations that they give certifications for and whatnot. Is the pay significantly different from a master's as opposed to going to a doctoral? I'm sure that they want, like the big whoever, I don't even know who they is, but I'm sure that people want you to think that there is some massive pay difference in what you're doing. But I'm going to say, I mean, so sue me, I'm going to say that there's not a difference. It really depends on the area that you specialize in, what you do, how well you do in your master's program, whether or not you get this certification in licensed mental health. Because as somebody who has gone to therapy before, I'm sure nowadays it's much more common for people to go than it was when I was younger and had actual issues. But as somebody who's been to therapy, when you go and look, you go through your insurance to see who it covers, if you're lucky enough to have insurance. But you go and you look at who is going to specialize in your particular area. And the only difference that you're ever going to see looking at it from the patient perspective is whatever letters come after the person's name. And usually that's not what you're focused on. Usually you're looking at, okay, are they specialized in phobias? Do they do eating disorders? Do they do whatever it is the patient is coming to you for? So it depends on what you specialize in. If you're a general mental health counselor, you're probably going to make less than a general clinical psychologist at the PhD level, because they're just going to be rating the difference between your degrees and go, okay, you've been around a little bit longer, so we're going to pay you a little bit more money. But if you're a licensed mental health counselor and you're specialized in like marriage counseling or something like that, something really specific, and you're good at it, and you carve a little niche out for yourself in the market. So part of it's also where exactly you're going to be doing this. But you can make the same, if not more, money with a master's degree than the PhD. I strongly suggest anybody who's going to look into becoming a therapist, and you know that's what you want to do, you know you don't want to do anything else with that clinical degree other than be a therapist, do the master's degree. Cheaper, easier, less student loans, less headache, 2 years, you're done. Extra 10 months that you can do while you're working in some sort of mental health degree, some sort of mental health field. You're out, you're good, you can start working. Much, much better than spending 5 or 6 years in a clinical PhD program making yourself crazy. Mental health therapists, so the starting salary that I've seen, it could be anywhere from like 40 or 50 if you're working in like a social work government sort of setting, up through like 200, 300,000 if you're in your own private practice in Pinecrest somewhere, where you're charging people that are coming in and paying you like $500 an hour for what you do. So something I'll tell you, all of you who are interested in doing some sort of therapy, which again was like the majority of the class if you looked at the differences in that poll. You have to be somebody who knows something about business to go in and own and run your own practice, because you're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to be able to hire employees, if you're going to have a receptionist, who's going to handle the interaction between you and the insurance providers if you even decide that you want to take insurance. Some people operate solely on no insurance, cash only, whatever sort of deals. You have to decide where you're going to practice out of. And there's a lot of different things involving business, accounting, recruiting, marketing, like legal stuff. You have to have your own lawyer and whatnot when you do this. So you might be taking a little less in terms of pay, whether or not it's at the master's or PhD level. If you work for somebody else, because they're assuming that liability, they're assuming the rent and utilities of wherever it is you need to be. They're providing you with the clerical staff. So if you want to go and do it by yourself, it's going to cost you more money, it's going to take more time, and you're going to need some sort of background in business, or you're going to have like partners that have that background. So it can get really complicated. You don't just get to go finish your degree and go, I'm going to be a therapist and people are going to come and see me. It's a pretty complicated process. So to round this out, there's, again, specializations at the master's level, and then at the PhD, PsyD, EdD level for this general mental health counseling thing. You're just looking, again, at general clinical psychologists. There's developmental psychologists, so people who are working with a variety of different developmental things, not necessarily sitting down and working in like a therapy setting. And then rehabilitation psychologists, which can be just advanced kinds of almost everything that we've talked about so far. So that all falls within this general mental health counseling bubble. So area number 3, hospital and medical facility careers. So careers that are directly involved in being in a hospital or being in a clinic. Like, no matter what you do, where you find this, it's going to be in some sort of medical facility. So at the AA level with a degree in psych, you can be a medical records clerk or technician. You actually have to go through quite a bit of HIPAA-related stuff to be in medical records because you're handling some extremely confidential information. Patient and client records are no joke. If any of that stuff leaks out, you're in very, very big trouble. So at the bachelor's level, and as I get further down this list, it's not going to be as well fleshed out as my earlier ones because I haven't gotten there yet in terms of making this all pretty. So bear with me, but there's still some stuff here. General psychometrics and statistician. This is something that I've actually had some of you write me emails and ask me about because I talk about it so much. But if you like statistics, and say maybe you get a minor in statistics or you just show some sort of proficiency in statistics, you can go become a psychometrist. It's a tongue twister, but you essentially work in bridging the gap between whoever's running psychological types of experiments and coming up with data, and then the people that need to see that data in order to integrate it or apply it to some sort of like therapeutic technique or whatever. So psychometrics people are going to look a lot at the statistics related things, but they're also going to figure out how to phrase it in a way that other people can understand without having to know anything about the numbers. And you'll see these types of people, statisticians, psychometrics people, in a lot in hospitals because you're always doing some sort of thing with patients related to some sort of experimental condition, whether or not you realize it. But Baptist is one of the people that hires psychology students straight out with a bachelor's degree to work in their analytics departments. And that's a good job. It's a well-paying job. I don't have the salaries anymore. I haven't gotten these as fine-tuned as the others. But it's a good, stable job. It's never going to go away. And the better you get at statistics, the better you're going to get paid to be in these positions. FIU has an analytics department. So this isn't hospital specific. You can be a psychometrics person in other fields. It's just something included in this hospital one. But if you're interested in stats at all, I suggest it. It's a good little niche area for you to work in. So again, within medical facilities, hospice or nursing home worker. So this is not a widely popular job in psychology because it's an extremely difficult job, but I know that there's at least one person in your class who is looking into doing this. It is incredibly necessary. Like, I just gave myself goosebumps talking about this because at some point we all have something in common. We are all going to die. We're all going to reach that point in our life. And when we get there, we want people who are going to treat us well, who are going to have knowledge about our conditions. And when you have loved ones who get to that point in their life that need that kind of care, you want them to be the kind of people that are going to appreciate later life patients just as much as they would appreciate a newborn, which not a lot of people do. They tend to think once you reach a certain point in your life, you kind of got the most that you could out of it, so we're not going to prioritize you as much. So people who work in hospice or nursing homes have to deal with people who are going to be sick, people who might have dementia, Alzheimer's, late stages of cancer and different types of diseases where essentially you're just maintaining their quality of life and making sure that they have as pain-free and pleasant of an existence until we kind of know that they're already terminal. So you have to be a very specific person to be in this area, but it's extremely important to have these people working there. Up at the master's level in terms of medical related stuff, you have addiction psychologists. So again, this is all mental health counseling degrees. Addiction psychologists or substance abuse counselors. So you're working with people that have addictions and substance abuse problems. There's hospital patient service representatives. These people are going to be working at a much higher level with insurance companies and the interactions between like individual patient units and insurance companies. So it's going to be a more technical job than applied working with patients sort of thing. And then there's a behavioral health psychiatric nurse. So you can mesh the psychology with some sort of background in medicine. I'm sure they're going to want a specialization where you get some sort of medical credentials, but you can be a nurse in the scope of working with different people with mental health conditions. Again, not going to be the easiest of jobs because you are probably going to be working in the psych ward of a hospital. And the people who make it to psych wards in a hospital, as opposed to just get referred to different therapists for outpatient treatment, have very serious conditions, and they can be a very rough population to work with. They can be a scary population to work with. So you've got to really be into that kind of thing to want to do that. And they have something called an outpatient psychologist. So regardless of what you go into a hospital for, there's somebody who transitions you from whatever ailment you went into to letting you back out into the world, whether it's a social worker or, you know, one of the technicians or whatnot. But they have actual psychologists where, so this one particularly said MA, Master's in Mental Health, and 2 years of experience with substance abuse populations. So this particular job listing was looking at substance abuse and having these people leave hospitals. But it could be a wide variety of things. Like people could find out that they have some sort of disease and you need to work with them and the acceptance of that and whatnot. So you're going to be looking at medical reasons why people would need a counselor. Again, not the easiest of things to do. So there's actually a couple of other cool things that fall under, well, hospice counselor. So you'd be providing psychological services like therapy services to people in hospice. So coping with fate and that sort of stuff. But then there's two jobs that I didn't know existed until I went and tried to do this. Neonatal and infant mental health therapists. So there are actually jobs where you work with the pregnant mother at the end of term and the infant up until their first like month or so of life with the neonatal health psychologist, and then through kind of like the first year with the infant mental health therapist. But you actually work with them in a therapeutic psychological way to get them through any problems that they might have when they're like really tiny, like maybe they're premature and they're in the hospital for a long period of time. And these people just work with babies. They do psychology and they work with babies. So I had never heard of it, so I don't have a very wide range of knowledge on it, but it does exist within the scope of hospitals. So if you're interested in babies and children and psychology, interesting thing for you to look into. So at the PhD level, again, you're just looking at those types of positions for the master's degree, but getting paid a little more because they're a little more specialized. So you have a clinical psychologist, just like everything else does. They have something called an administrative hospital psychologist. And then I found another job that's called a neuropsychologist. So you'd be working within like a clinical neuropsychology program, doing different stuff at a clinical level with that. They have a few more of these too. Psychotherapist, which anytime you see psychotherapist, it's essentially a therapist with a PhD. there's not a whole lot of differentiation other than they call it psychotherapist. It's like your way of adding, like when I graduate, I'm saying when, I'm not saying if, I'm saying when. Like I'd be Dr. Houston, right? So if you're saying you're a psychotherapist, it's essentially implying that you've done some sort of PhD somewhere and you want to be called that. They have a couple other ones. A pain psychologist. Another interesting thing that you can do working with people who have pain management and approaching pain management from the psychological perspective as opposed to dosing people up with medications and whatnot. And then if you were to go and get an MD, this is where psychiatrist would fall under this general category. So I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I do have 8. So I guess I can go to this last one, even though it's not necessarily related. So my fourth category is the IO, so the industrial, organizational, or business-related psychology careers. So here you're looking at human resources, sales, customer service, training, anything related to business that in some way ties into psychology. So with an associate's degree, you can start getting into the IO field by being a clerk in an HR department, which is something I did while I was getting a master's degree. It's an interesting position. Sometimes you're a glorified copy maker or coffee maker, but you do get a really good perspective into how HR actually works. So I worked in auditing. I worked in the files a lot, the employee files, which again have a lot of HIPAA regulations because you can't let employees' information just get out there. I worked with hiring people, firing people, staffing coordinators, training coordinators. You get a little bit of experience in just about every different subfield of IO psychology. So if you do want to do IO and you're looking for a job that somehow relates to it, look for anything related to HR clerk for pretty much any company. And the pay is not that bad starting off with an associate's degree either. If they even want an associate's degree, sometimes they just have you come in and do like a test on Microsoft Office and a typing test and see if you can get through the general clerical stuff. And then you've got positions in stuff like sales and customer service. So you're looking at the kinds of people that, I don't know, they always look pretty miserable. I'm like thinking of every time I walk into T-Mobile and somebody hops on me, it's like those kinds of people that are trying to sell you stuff. And it does relate to psychology. You have to learn powers of persuasion and social psychology related stuff to be in some of these positions and be successful. So at the bachelor's level, there's various positions related to human resources. So you can do this from psychology with just a psychology degree, but if you do know you want to go into human resources, I would suggest doing some sort of master or minors in business or management related field so that you show some sort of competency and background in business. But you can work in staffing, which is identifying what person needs to be at a job site and what time they're going to work there, everything in terms of like scheduling that person and whatnot, making sure the right people are in the right place to work. You can be a generalist, which just works in the office at a higher level than the HR clerk does. They do a little bit of everything involved in the human resources department. You can be somebody that does hiring, so you can do credentialing and whatnot. There's recruitment, where you work literally with recruitment of potential employees. There are a lot of those positions that you'll see on campus where their job is just college recruitment. They go out and they represent the company on behalf of the entire company at like career fairs, and they can travel around the country doing that. It's actually a fun thing if you did want to travel and you had the flexibility to go around, is to be a recruiter at college campuses. It seems like a really fun job. Within human resources, you could be a training person, which is a really fun job from what I've seen, to work in training, because you get to work with different people all the time and in different training areas. There's just a lot. There's a lot of different jobs within human resources that tie psych and business in together that you can get with just the bachelor's degree of psychology. So there's general business administration jobs. You can be a general manager. So most of the time, management positions won't require that you have a specific business degree. They'll accept the fact that you're a psychologist, like a budding psychologist, and that's okay. You can work in marketing and advertising stuff as well. So at the bachelor's level, you're looking very much at much more business related jobs than psych, because we haven't yet started to integrate those things. But once you get the master's, you can start working on things where the psychology and the business really start to get interwoven. If you become an LMHC, do you still need to be BCBA? I have no idea. Behavior analysis and mental health counseling are two different areas. So being a behavior analysis or behavior analyst is not the same as being a mental health counselor. They are two extremely different areas with different requirements. So I would say that you couldn't really do either one of those things with the degree from the opposite. Like you would need, if you wanted to be a behavior analysis mental health counselor at that level, you would need both things for that. Where was I? My last thing, the master's in the IO related fields. So there's a few jobs here. I'm going to do my best to describe them. Executive coach. So this is a position where you would go into a company and work specifically with their management teams and the people at really high levels of the corporation in terms of some issue or communication related thing that they may have working from the top down in an organization. So you're not going to be working with the employees. You're going to be working with the people that have the power in the organization, either on maintaining the power or fixing some sort of problem. But most of these positions will be something where you work for a consulting company and you hop around to different organizations. IO psychology is becoming more prominent, but organizations having their own IO psychologist is still a pretty new thing. So they still end up being this kind of contracted thing. You can go into some sort of management in terms of a lot of different things. You can be a marketing manager, an advertising manager, an HR manager, a diversity manager. So diversity management is becoming a lot more prominent when we're talking about just globalization in general. So the workplace is much more diverse in terms of the people who are working there. And then the people who are working there work with much more diverse populations in just product sales across the seas and multinational corporations and mergers and different stuff like that. So if you're into that, you're really into the cultural sort of stuff, which in Miami, we definitely are a very cultural and diverse area. There's an area for that in IO. And then there's something called an organizational developer. This is definitely in that contractual field where you are going in for a specific purpose, whether it's to work on a training with the whole organization or crisis manage something within an organization. But organizational developers will have like a particular project, whether it's a week, a month, a year. They'll go in and they'll set something up within their parent organization, and then they will go in and do these contract consultation jobs with an organization to help them solve a problem or to help train them. So say an organization goes through a merger, like you had Sprint and Nextel merge, and then you've got these two different populations of people who worked for different companies with different ethics and whatnot. And now they suddenly have to work well together. An organizational developer would go in and facilitate different sort of team building things and just merger related stuff. So it's one of the cooler, more popular IO jobs. It's probably the most typical IO job. If you think of an IO person, what is an IO person going to do? They're going to go into businesses and do something that's going to help the psychological well-being of the employees while still making money for the business. Social service, consulting service, director of business development. These are all very specific titles that all tie into the same general idea. So at the PhD level, you have an IO psychologist, which if you're talking about literally an IO psychologist as a job title, you are going to be not a therapist because you're not a mental health counselor once I have my PhD, I'm not going to be authorized to do therapy with people, but I can be an organizational psychologist and go in and deal specifically with issues that relate to the workplace. So we can talk about work-family conflict, the balance of your outside life with your work life. Maybe you just had a child and you're dealing with balancing that, or the different benefits or things that you might need now because you have a family. Just different aspects of your workplace that you would need to go in and speak with somebody about in order to make your job a better place for you to be at. So only really big organizations and really progressive organizations are going to have their own IO psychologist now. Like if you go look at Google or Facebook or Apple or any of those things, they have their own IO psychologists. Those are the people that at some point originated all of the little rooms where they go and take their naps in the middle of the day at Google, and the fact that they have the Starbucks there that's free. Like those are the people that plot out what exactly do our employees need to be better, stronger workers, to leave here and feel happy about their job, to be more satisfied, to be more committed, that sort of stuff. So I'm a little biased because this is exactly what I do, but I think it's a really cool way of meshing psychology with a much more applied thing because we spend so much of our lives working. And talked about this earlier, but psychometrics plays a serious role in the industrial side of IO psychology. So if you get your PhD in IO psychology and you focus more on the I side, you'd be looking at assessments, developing measures for training or for hiring purposes, for advancement purposes. So like there is an IO quantitative psychologist behind the police department and who determines the testing that moves people from a regular person up to captain, up to whatever rank. So, and there's also people who determine what tests you get when you apply for a job and how relevant those tests are to how you're going to be as a worker. So why does giving you the Myers-Briggs test, which is terrible, the worst measure ever, totally invalid for measuring anything personality related. But there are people who determine why do we need a Big 5 personality test when we go to hire you. Those are the people at that level that do that. So I still retained 3 of you. They may not have been the original 3. They really may not have, but you're still here. So that's 1 through 4 of my list. The next one, which I'll do Thursday, is careers related to education. So stuff in schools, specifically in schools and with children. Legal psychology, and there's an other category, which there are some very interesting jobs in the other category, which is just stuff that does not relate to anything that I've said so far. And then the 8th category I have is careers outside of psychology, but that relate to psychology, which would be where a lot of the stuff that you guys want to do would fall in with occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, legal, like going and being a lawyer, med school, all those types of things. So if you're interested in any of those career areas, I'll do another one of these things on Thursday because just going through the first 4, we made it to an hour. So hopefully this is actually helpful and not really boring as you listen to it. But I think especially if you listen to like the entire hour of it, you'd see there's so many jobs in psychology that you can get, and especially with that bachelor's degree in psychology. And we've only gotten through 4 areas. So there's still 4 more. Lots of opportunities for career-related stuff. So hope it helped. If you have any feedback or whatever, shoot me an email. Let me know if you want to see something different next time. But other than that, have a good rest of the 3 hours of your weekend and a great week.